James, congratulations on SBS's new parental leave policy and the introduction of the Grace Papers program to support the careers of working parents. What prompted you to prioritise this as an initiative?
At the heart of SBS's purpose is to create a more inclusive society. And so, therefore, it's really important for us to have the trust of our audiences and to be authentic, to ensure that we have a work environment and a set of policies which create inclusion, that allow all to participate equally, that allow us to deliver the best outcomes for our audience as possible. So it was really important to me upon taking this role that I prioritise diversity and inclusion generally. And specifically, we really wanted to update our what was previously a maternity and paternity leave policy to make it a parental leave policy, such that we have no views about whether you're a mother or a father. We have no views about the mode in which you became a parent. What's important is that we think about primary or secondary parental obligations, and we have a policy that supports men and women, and particularly men, given their participation in parenting has tended to be less than women, provide them the opportunity to really engage in parenting to the extent that it suits them.
And it also drives gender equity for women and men. Based on your experience and observations at SBS with respect to gender equality, what's your vision?
Our vision at SBS, my vision, is about having a workplace which encourages equal participation, equal opportunity for all, based on gender, based on culture, whatever defines you as a person. We want the best people to be able to come to SBS to participate in an equal and supportive environment where the best ideas make their way to the surface. We think that that's so consistent with not only being a model employer, but it's also consistent with the role we play in Australian society, which is all about creating a more inclusive society, a society underpinned by more respect for one another and better understanding of one another.
We know that gendered expectations often emerge when people do become parents. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience becoming a father?
Yeah, sure. I think there are two things that really sort of stick in my mind about becoming a father. The first is just the very practical absence of sleep. And people tell you to prepare for that when you're on your journey to becoming a parent. The level of fatigue was something that I found quite overwhelming, as did my partner. And I don't think you can ever describe to anyone that hasn't had a child what that's like. And of course, whilst you're dealing with that fatigue, many parents are also dealing with having to be present at work, dealing with the complexities of their job, and people that don't experience that or have been over a long time since having their children perhaps have lost connection with that fatigue and that experience you're going through. It's also a very deeply emotional experience at the same time. The second thing for me about having a child was that it put everything else in my life into perspective. Because, again, for me, once you have a child, that becomes the most important thing in your life. The nucleus of your life becomes your family. And so it creates different levels of value applied to different aspects of your life: work, friends, other parts of your life.
Were the expectations on you compared with your partner different?
To the extent that we played different roles in that parental journey, yes. My partner, my wife, was the primary caregiver at home, and that created expectations for her around leaving her job, having a new experience as a new mother. For me, my expectation of myself and of her was to support at home in the ways that I could. Night feeds, for example, sterilising the bottles, all those things that I could practically do, whilst also continuing to work and provide an income for the family.
And obviously a shift now in introducing parental leave for all.
Indeed, and what's wonderful about that is that it creates a more inclusive environment for all forms of families. Families come in all different shapes and sizes. That's wonderful. And so we want to make sure that everyone that wants to participate as being a parent can. It also should drive greater participation of men in that parental journey, because many men are now making the choice to be primary parents, and so we want to make sure our policies are aligned with that outcome.
The Human Rights Commission tells us that 1 in 2 women and also 1 in 4 men continue to experience some form of pregnancy-related bias or discrimination at the time that they are becoming parents.
Yes.
What is your advice or your approach to those people who might be experiencing bias?
I think, firstly, pick an employer that has strong values and values its staff. I think at SBS we're really proud about the way we value our staff, and we create environments that allow people to participate, that are truly inclusive. I think you need to speak out. You need to speak to your manager. If they're not listening, you need to speak to your manager's manager. Hopefully, the things that we do here are modelled elsewhere. I talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. I think that's really important. We talk about the value of having an included workforce. We roll out policies which are consistent with that rhetoric. The parental leave policy is one of those policies that we've recently relaunched. We launched our flexible working policy. We have an inclusion council, which I chair, which is constituted of staff-led groups around areas of interest, which allows those interest areas to proactively influence policy. So, for example, we have a gender equality group called The Network. We have a group called SBS Pride, which is our LGBTIQ plus group. We have a group called SBS Access, which is about providing opportunity for people with a disability. So those groups actively influence policy. I think the final thing that we try to do to create inclusive environments and to reduce the chance of discrimination is that I make myself available. I sit out in a workstation now. I'm not locked in an office. I make myself available physically and via email to staff. I welcome people bringing their joys and their challenges to me, and I make sure I follow up on all of those things.
We know there's a flexibility stigma, particularly amongst men, actually. What's your advice to new dads looking to take on a new pathway as they become parents?
Well, I think they should talk to their employer as early as possible about it. I think many employers are faced with the same challenges we are at SBS, which is that we've got an operating model, a business model that's changing rapidly. Our audiences are changing their preferences very quickly. And that requires us to be very responsive. And to be responsive, you need the best people, and you need them to be in an environment where they can really participate. And so I think, certainly at SBS, I imagine other employers are increasingly open to the notion of retaining good people in a work mode that suits them, because that's to the employer's advantage. So talk about it. Don't be shy about your work preferences. Don't be shy about the fact that you have things outside of work, whether it's families or other things that interest you and require your attention.
It's really coming to the organisation with a request and a solution and a belief that this isn't just about the individual, but it's a business case.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're all likely to need flexibility at some stage in our lives to care for ourselves, for others, and for members of our community. Yet we know that flexibility can still detrimentally impact the careers of women in particular, particularly as they're looking to get into more leadership roles. How are you addressing that at SBS, and what does it look like at SBS?
Yeah, look, great question. I think the first thing I'd say is that we're pretty happy about our gender balance in the organisation. 51% of our staff are female, 48% of our people leaders are female, 50% of my direct reports are female, and that's great. But of course, as you said, more women than men tend to require flexibility in their work. So it's really important that we have a workforce that reflects Australian society makeup. That's great. But we also need to make sure that we've got excellent flexibility working policies, because we want our staff to be able to participate flexibly to the extent that it suits them. And for us, like many organisations, we are really focused on making sure we've got the best people possible participating as well as they can in an equal and inclusive workforce. And therefore, the way you retain the best people is that you allow them to pursue other interests or other responsibilities they have outside the workforce without losing access to them as valuable members of your workforce.
You've clearly articulated the business case around why employers are introducing flexibility, yet we know there's still a grudge that exists, when people are trying to access it, a grudge that they feel themselves, that they put upon themselves, and that they experience from others. How are you trying to overcome that at SBS?
In a number of ways. Firstly, I talk about diversity and inclusion generally, and specifically I talk about things like parental leave, I talk about flexible working. When I address staff, when I do activities like this, I want people to know that there's support at the top of the organisation for flexibility. We also have a series of policies that we've launched which specifically create the opportunity for flexibility. And I think our teams know that retaining great people flexibly is a way to retain great people. The industry is changing at such a rate that we need the best people in this organisation, people who are passionate about being here. What I've noticed through my career about people who are given the permission to work flexibly is they tend to be really committed staff members. They are very grateful for that flexibility that you've afforded them. They tend to work really productively in the time that they're committed to working. They tend to be great employees.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.